Welcome to the Wagon Wheel podcast. I am Jarrod Kimber. Just an apology if I missed Uncovered earlier this week. If you're someone who is, what day does that come out? Monday or Tuesday, whatever day it is. And you're like, I base my whole week around this, that's my early week podcast. I'd like to apologize. But yeah, I ended up in a holiday area where that didn't happen. I've had to rush this one out as well. So apology to the Patreon crew. Actually, just wait 1 second while I, but yeah, no, apologies to the Patreon crew. They probably didn't get as many chances to put the questions in as they normally would as well. That was me telling my kids to stop yelling at each other while they're packing. If you heard a pause there at all. But if you do have a super, it's a great day for a super chat. But any comments that you have in the YouTube, I can get to because I've only got a couple from Patreon. I will try and make it a little bit shorter than it has been normal anyway. But let me get to the questions from Patreon. And remember, it's the best way to support us. It allows us to build and hire more people like Sean and Muku and AJ, who's in on the call today, and everyone else. So, the more support we get, the more people we can on more videos and podcasts and everything we can make. Manon says, are there any cricket video libraries where you can watch old games ball by ball, such as something from the 2003 World Cup or from a random bilateral? So there used to be full games up on the IC Facebook page. So I watched the entire England-Netherlands game there, the one from, it was that 2009? I think that's right. Yeah, 2009. So that was a fantastic game, to watch, and really interesting to look back at it from, from a modern perspective and everything else. But sadly, Facebook, the ICC started taking those down. So obviously they didn't want that. There were other full games there as well. I don't know how many, and I don't kind of know why they had certain full games up there. The truth of it is there just isn't. I don't know why some of the other boards don't do it. Even if they don't want to put up, the entire 7-hour files, they could actually, especially with some of the older stuff, put up complete innings or complete spells from bowlers, or cut it down and do a lot more. But they haven't. I'd love it if there was more and more of that sort of stuff available out there. But at current stand, it's not. It's not great. Obviously, Robelinda and the other, what's the other guy called? The Desi Robelinda. And there's a few others out there now. What would you call them? Sort of pirate archivists, which is a ridiculous term, but that's probably how they're seen by cricket boards. Although a lot of them have been hired by cricket boards now too. They have all this and would love to do it, I'm sure. But sadly, we're in a situation where we can't do that. So, look, I think it's a problem. I think one thing I like with the old NBA app is you can go back a long time and you see everyone. I'm happy to pay for it. If all the boards got together, imagine that. They could, release cricket.tv just with old games on it, and I would still pay for that and go back through it. I think it would be a great product. As usual, cricket boards leave something on the board, and what you could do is some of those extended highlights that some of those archivists put up is probably the best that we can get. But it is ridiculous how much cricket has been filmed and is available in a recorded space, but it's not actually shared with, I don't know, the people who pay for cricket. All right. Ram Kumar says, what is the most effective way to get data to analyze player and team performances? And what tools do you need other than Excel? I mean, I wouldn't say you need Excel. We use Excel because that's where our skills are limited by. The best way is obviously if you can code, and the best place is CrickSheet or CrickSheet. Just forget if it's CrickSheet or CrickSheets, and I say it really confidently, and can never remember it. But that's the best way of doing it. That has all the ball by ball data in the world. Obviously, there are now websites. In fact, my man Dese is he's put out his own website, which I haven't even gone to yet. Have a look at what he's got up over there. Is it Crickmetric? I think it's another one that's out there. So there are some people who are putting some stuff available online. But if you really want to do analysis, the best place is to start from scratch with Crickmetric, with CrickSheet. But you do need coding skills to be able to get to that information. Patrick says, does Cameron Green at number 3 in limited odds make sense? He could. I think in one-day cricket, I don't think I have any major issues with him batting at number 4. I think in T20 as he is now, it probably makes a lot more sense to use him as an opener, where he, had majority of his success so far. I think if Mumbai don't want him to be an opener, and I think that's a fair thing if they want him to be a number 5. Number 4. Yeah, number 5. Then they need to spend the next year developing him, right? And a similar thing with Australia. Like, how are they going to develop him as well? Where does he best fit in? I think with his skills in one-day cricket, he can be pushed down the order a little bit more. I think with his skills in T20 cricket, he's probably closer to the top. Number 3 is kind of halfway between all of those different things. So perhaps there is a good space for him to be able to move into there. But we're a long way from knowing what he is as a limited overs cricketer. And I think that is part of the problem here. There's a lot of excitement about Cameron Green, and you get this all the time with all rounds. And then I've talked about this a lot with Shadab Khan. Shadab Khan got so much excitement about him, and then there was a bit of a backlash against him. And then developing into the kind of cricketer that, Pakistani fans probably demanded he be from day one. It takes time. Jadeja wasn't a good batsman for what? I want to say best part of a decade. Is that fair? I'm trying to remember what year he started, but it was a long time when his batting skills hadn't, come across. Vittori was supposed to be an all-rounder early on in his career. Shane Watson, after he got injured, had to sort of relearn bowling and in some ways change the way he did. Well, that would probably be fair, wouldn't it? Ben Stokes still averages under 40 in Test match cricket. All-rounders develop in a much different way than I think other players. And because of that, there's a lot of extra pressure put on them because we know what they could possibly do. And I don't want to say it stymies their development, but you have to be smart about it. And that's why I say, Mumbai needs to make a decision. We want to bat long term and then invest their time in that. Get him in some other leagues if at all possible. Hopefully gets played in order for Australia, all these sorts of different things. That's how you develop players. And it'll be the same for Australia. If Mumbai decides they want him in one position, Australia decide they want him in another position, well, then Australia need to work out how to best develop him outside of what he does for Mumbai. Those are the sorts of conversations that should be had already. I do feel it's a little bit excitement at a new toy at the moment. And I get it. He's a very, very talented player. If he's going to develop the way that the teams who have him want him to, there has to be a lot more to it than, well, he's really good. So let's just, see how he goes. Ben King said, other sports have much more sexy trade deadlines and in general more trade more. Will franchise leagues start to follow suit? And if so, how do they increase trade volumes? So there's a few different reasons. Cricket is terrible at trades. Ben, you can go back and have a look at, I've done a few videos on this. Mumbai, I've made out like bandits quite a few times. There was the Ben Dunk for some bloke who from Tasmania trade in the Big Bash. Part of it is because there's no draft, like proper draft in a lot of these leagues. Although even when there's drafts, they don't seem to use that equity available to them to, trade away first round picks. Maybe that will start to happen more as teams go forward. That's one problem. Another problem is, like, I think I've talked about this in the IPL. If you're trading away a player in the IPL, if you're trading away, and a lot of American sports leagues work this way, for instance. If you're trading away a team if you're trading away to a team in another division or another conference or whatever it may be, you don't actually have to go up against that player very much. And chances are you're only going to play against them, towards the pointy end of the season. And that means you've already had success in your team, and it's not the end of the world. When the IPL had 8 teams or 10 teams, or some of these other leagues, 6 teams and 8 teams, if you're trading someone away, they're right there. So it is different. You are going to play against them more, and there is going to be an impact on you if they do well for another team. The seasons are very short, which is another interesting one. There's I talked to some IPL insiders when they had a look at my T20 trades. My last IPL trades. video, and they were sort of saying that the owners don't really get the concept of trades yet. And so the owners are asking for things like back for teams. And don't get me wrong, that happens. That's, you watch Moneyball, gets what a can machine or a can dispenser, soda for his team. These things happen, right? And I think that's absolutely part of it. But when you're an IPL owner and you are very, very rich, and your team is a $1 billion enterprise, and you are trying to get a couple of $100K back to put into research and development for your team or whatever it is, you could invest that yourself and not lose a really good player. And I've always said this: a lot of trading in sports is about maximizing your roster. And that's the bit that bothers me about what these things. If they get a couple of flyers at a couple of young players from another team, be like, okay, that's an interesting thing. If they have one star that wanted out and they got back a middle player, it's maybe some better draft spots in another team, another league, not the IPL, obviously. Which the auction may help with this, of course, as well. But a couple of spots like that and maybe some cash, then you're starting to think you're moving in the right direction. But yeah, it's not very good. I do believe that they will work it out. I do think it will happen more often. It'd be very, very interesting to see how it goes into the future. I think that's a really, really trying to think of the best way of putting it. I think that's one thing might be the next area that teams really start to dominate in. We've already seen Mumbai do it. I think you'll see other teams in other leagues around the world start to dominate, and that's when teams will take it more seriously, is my guess. Manan says, how do player contracts work in the IPL and other leagues around the world? Are they only contracted for 1 or 2 seasons? Can the contract be renewed, or do they have to go into the auction? That just depends. Or it would be, that's kind of, Manan, an impossible question to answer. Generally, most players would be on a 1 or 2 season contract, depending on the player, the amount that has been invested in them. Obviously, all these leagues, and some of these leagues still do this, where they have a reset after 4 years, and you can only keep a couple of players. Because of that, you don't get that many very, very long contracts out there. Chris Green is the one with the 7-year contract, where he must be a few years into that one, I would have thought by now. There aren't many players out there with those kinds of contracts. I don't think there's many other Big Bash players with those kinds of contracts out there that I can think of off the top of my head anyway. And in the other leagues, because they have these reset valves in them, where they have a mega auction or a mega draft every 4 years, you don't get the ability to do that. So when I was at St. Lucia, we were at the end of that cycle. So I think one player had a contract going in, which I think was Kesrick Williams. So I had to re-sign him in the next go. And then I had complete flexibility with the other 3 players. So I don't know. Raheem Cornwall might have been a player you might say, I'll give you a 4-year contract because we know we want you for this entire cycle. And Kieran Pollard probably wouldn't have wanted a 4-year contract, or maybe he would have if the money was right. But he might have wanted a 1-year or a 2-year contract. So there is some negotiations between teams and agents and everything else. As far as what happens afterwards, you can re-sign with teams. And you can certainly sign before the auctions. A lot of the auctions and the drafts that you see in T20 cricket are agreed beforehand. They're complete. It's a mockery of what it is. And it's a bit of a debacle from that point of view. But you can certainly have a situation where there are some live decisions being made, and there are some live auction spots or live draft spots or whatever it may be beforehand. But there's a lot that's already pre-agreed. I was involved with a league where I was told what our 3rd pick was beforehand. And I was like, how do we know what our 3rd pick is? We don't know which players we're going to get 1st and 2nd. So knowing what our 3rd pick is, I'd like to know what we're doing 1st and 2nd. So there's a lot of weird stuff when it comes to the player auctions and everything else. All right, sorry. I feel like I'm blacking out again a lot, but this is the last podcast at my parents' house. So yeah, that's the end of the Patreon questions. I will play a new ad, actually. I say that excitedly. You won't care that it's a new ad, but it's good for Athletic Greens. We'll play their ad, and I'll go through the comments to see if there's anything else worth chatting about.
Our next partner is Athletic Greens. If cricket has taught us anything, it's that green things are good for you. I take AG1 by Athletic Greens every day. I gave AG1 a try because a while back I was stuck in a studio reporting on New Zealand, England on overnight. When those games went on, I was up early watching India, Australia at around 4 a.m. In between afternoon naps, I had to watch the Women's World Cup. And when all that was finished, I was doing early mornings for Bangladesh, England. Ignoring the fact that there's too much cricket, that's a stupid schedule for a human being as well. And so Athletic Greens was a far better alternative to ice baths. And after taking it, I felt a lot better. In fact, the whole thing probably kept me sane and healthy at the same time. And also being the kind of nutritional drink I needed to survive those hours, and also the 2 a.m. biltong binges I did a few times. Look, I am not going to pretend I have a balanced diet. So Athletic Greens is how I cover the nutritional basis. 1 small scoop of AG1 with water, and I drink it first thing in the morning each day. Done. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and also 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/Inca. That's the Inca from the end of my Red Inca podcast. So athleticgreens.com/Inca. Check it out now because it is the best green top you'll ever invest in.
All right, welcome back. Let's go through some of these questions, one of which I put up during the ad. Sorry about that. Keshav said, hey, Jarrod, my question is whether the impact substitute rule is going to affect the quality and quantity of all-rounders. No, because that rule won't stay as it is forever. If that rule works, we'll go on to something far different. So that rule probably won't affect it. But eventually, if we get to a point where you have substitutes and you have, let's say, I think a realistic amount is 3 substitutes in the next, in 5 years' time in T20 cricket, at least in 1 or 2 leagues, if not all leagues. By that point, then I do think there is going to be something a little bit different. I do think at that point we will find that all-rounders are worth different amounts. And, the guys who can bowl the 1 to 2 overs when the conditions favor them probably won't be as important perhaps going ahead. I don't think until we get to full substitutions that all-rounders will ever not be helpful, because let's say you had Andre Russell and you had 5 bowlers. Andre Russell is still, if Andre Russell is your 6th bowler in that situation, but can only bat in your top 10 in this weird sort of substitution world what we're talking about, he's still really valuable, right? And so we're seeing with Shohei Ohtani in the baseball how a valuable a player can be when they can still do both things. And that's a sport that it kind of tried to kill around us the last 100 years. So our sport breeds them in a different way. So I do think there will be players that will continue. I can't see how Andre Russell, Cameron Green, if he comes good, Ravi Jadeja, Moeen Ali still wouldn't be valuable going into the future because they give you extra variation. So if you go into a game and you've got 10 absolute gun batters and you still have another bowler who can rag the ball one way or another, that's still a huge advantage. It gives you huge flexibility in your 12, 13, 14, 15 player roster, whatever we get to. So yes and no. I do think the sort of bits and pieces that chip in may be less useful unless they actually have who's a good one. Anton Devcic would be a really interesting one going into the future because on ragging pitches, Anton Devcic can, for a part-timer, spins the ball a long way. Might always have some value, whereas that sort of David Hussey type all-rounder maybe less so. And where says, is it just England not produced as many great players as other top nations post-war, especially considering their resources? In an all-time Test 11, how many English would there be? Yeah, if you look at my book, Test Cricket, the Unauthorized Biography, you will see that from 1960, well, basically from start of Boycott's career and through to Joe Root, there really aren't that many universal great English players that come through. Obviously both of them was incredible, but he doesn't live up to the potential that he showed when he was young. And he does sort of fade away a little bit. He still ends up with very, very good overall career stats, but he wasn't as good as Imran Khan, right? And he wasn't as good as Garfield Sobers, so he doesn't make that team. There aren't that many other players, even Jimmy Anderson, as good as he's been. If Jimmy Anderson had been as good in the second half of his career as he was, if he's been as good in the first half of his career as he was in the second half of his career, he's all-time GOAT type player, but he's not an all-time GOAT if he'll end up having the most wickets ever. So they've had a lot of players like that, and I've talked about it quite a bit. And I just think everyone else caught up, and everyone else used county cricket as a nursery to better improve their players, but the English players weren't playing as much first-class cricket outside of county cricket. Cricket also has its own flaws, the way it's set up. It's not particularly set up to produce test players. It is probably much better off to hone the skills of someone who's already a test player than it is to actually set one up from scratch. There's many other, parts of that. But no, I mean, everyone thinks this, I think. The 80s, they were terrible. The 90s, they were probably better than we remember, but the 90s, they still didn't really go anywhere, and they were, ranked behind Zimbabwe at one point. The early 2000s, obviously had the 2005 era. Then they get to 2010. So we do have that, and they weren't dreadful in the 70s. And they were still pretty good in the 60s, but they haven't produced the same level of top level players. I think that's very, very fair. And it's, the wet ball stuff also seems to have gone into this, but there's no doubt that they stopped innovating and developing players. And as cricket became international, they kind of fell behind, and it's really obvious that happens. Anyway, says, I always see people commenting on older videos about how the quality of cricket has declined. Is this about their childhood? Certainly a factor, but is there any actual truth to this? There are more teams. So you would say that the actual quality of cricket in some ways is less strong. If you go back to the 1970s, if you go back to 1972, England were okay. Australia just starting to get together. South Africa were gone. Sri Lanka didn't exist. India and Pakistan were a long way from their best selves. New Zealand were not very good. Is that it? Have I named everyone? I mean, cricket's way stronger than 1972. You do have a bit of a interesting... So the 80s are really interesting, because what happens in the 80s is three teams who have never been good before all become good at the same time. So the three best teams in the 80s are West Indies, Pakistan, and then New Zealand, right? But England and Australia are not particularly good, and India are very good, although obviously they won the 83 World Cup. I'm kind of combining a few different things here, but India aren't brilliant at that point. Certainly nothing compared to what they were now, right? The 90s is what you're really talking about, right? And this is proper nostalgia, right? But it's also the fact that I've just said England wasn't as bad a team as people remember, and yet they were ranked under Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe were the 9th team in Test cricket, and they had, the Flowers and Heath Streak and Strangs. They had some really, really strong cricketers for the worst team in cricket at that point. Sri Lanka early, they had Vas, they had, Arjuna, Aravinda de Silva, a lot of quality players there, and Sanas Jayasuriya, a lot of quality players there and thereabouts in that team as well. So again, those are the two worst teams in that era. After that, you get Bangladesh comes in. Obviously, we now have Ireland and Afghanistan if we're just talking more Test cricket, but you also have Scotland and the Netherlands and Namibia and Papua New Guinea and, I'm trying to think who else is, UAE had a little moment there. USA cricket, wherever that is, Canadian cricket, where that is Kenya. So there's suddenly more cricket everywhere. It's impossible for me to think that the standard of cricket, with more people playing around the world, with more money involved in it, has gone down. The tightness of that sort of 90s era has disappeared. But to think that the bowlers are faster and the batters hit it further, and the bowlers, the spinners spin it at a quicker speed, and the fielding is better, and yet the overall quality of the cricket is lower, I'd find that almost impossible. There are things that make it look less quality, which is the batting averages have gone down. And the batting averages have gone down because of, DRS and the way that bowlers adapted that. The fact that it is easier to do analysis on a batter and find a weakness is to do analysis on a bowler and work out how to handle them. So there's so many different things involved in how these things go ahead. But yeah, I'd find it almost impossible to think that the quality of it is worse than it was in any other era. It's different, and it's really, really different. We saw from 2000 to 2016 one of the greatest batting eras that there has ever been in cricket. And to go from that to top order players not being able to survive 5 ball is probably grating on a lot of fans. And I think that's fair. But you know what was grating before? They kept talking about how flat the pitches were and how it was all weighted towards batters. So you can't. Dev says hardest shot in not Dev Wobble. Dev is the hardest shot in the book to play. I mean, when you say in the book, does that count the deal scoop and paddle scoop and all those? Those are hardest shots to play. Any premeditation is harder than a normal shot. I think some of those shots come very easy to people. I talked about this before. I don't particularly have a problem playing the reverse sweep against off spinners and leg spinners. Sometimes left arm finger spinners give me trouble. I get myself a little bit mishmashed against them, but I don't have problems playing the reverse sweep way that most other people do. But once you're premeditating, you are obviously, causing a huge variables that you can't control anymore. So I'd say those are the hardest shots to play. I think if you look at the overall analytics, the amount, if we had proper bat sensors all the time, I would say that the shot that is probably edged the most is probably the hook shot. Again, it makes sense? It's a short ball at your head. There's not much you can do to control it. Sometimes it's above your eyes. You're sort of flashing at it a little bit. So I think that's another very hard one. If you're looking at the sort of the more standard sort of shots, the hardest one to hit for most players is the on drive. And then the back foot drives are probably the other two. I think players can either back foot drive or they can't back foot drive. A little bit again there, but the players will tell you the hardest shot to play is a sweep, right? That's the thing about cricket. It really depends on the player themselves. Oh, one last one I would say is what percentage of leg glances do you think actually hit anywhere near the middle of the bat and are meant to go there? Thashura says, is there any way we could ask EA to create another good game? So if you go to my Instagram, I played the 1991, I think it's called International Cricket, which I think was the first cricket game made in Australia. Not sure if it was the first cricket game made anywhere in the world. Certainly nothing on the Graham Gooch Allen Border game that came, year and a half, 2 years later, which was much more developed. I played EA. I mean, I've played most of the cricket games, I suppose, at least a couple of times over years. So much so that people say, have you played this? And I don't know the name, but when I see the graphics, I can probably remember how to bowl an in-swinger or an out-swinger or play a cover drive on them. I did love the EA, the cricket games, but I've got nothing. I'm trying to remember what that Australian company is that makes all the new games. I think they do a really, really good job. I think it's a really hard game to come up with, and I found playing their game, so I've got it on the Switch. It's the most realistic bowling game, where I feel like you actually are bowling a little bit, so you might bowl 3 or 4 straight ones, and then, you bowl the a cross seam delivery or something, and it seems to work a lot better than the other ones where, swinging the ball violently one way or the other, and, the ball's still swinging really late in the game, and all sorts of things that used to happen on some of those games. I think it's really, really good. I don't think I enjoyed batting on it as much, and I think batting for me is on most of those video games, you kind of find a hack for batting, right? And then you can make a lot of runs. Was it the Shane Warne game? You could sweep everyone all the time. Was it Shane Warne, Brian Lara? And I do think that for me, sort of in a way that I've never really seen that in, let's say, an NFL game or a basketball game, a football game, which are, I still think the best sporting games are usually those games. And that's just because maybe they're easier code for. I don't know. Arnav says, in terms of difficulty in all sports, how in terms of difficulty in all sports, is fast bowling in the pantheon as the toughest things to do? I think that's what Arnav means. Yes, I suppose, boxers might disagree, but you get a gap between boxing, don't you? Do you know what I mean? I mean, you'd have to go through all the different sports and have a look at the average career span of someone. But if you are a genuine fast bowler, I would say, bowling fast, without injury over a 10-year period would be a minor miracle. If you are medium fast or fast medium, there are obviously things you can do at that point to mitigate some of the issue. But yeah, no, I definitely believe from that perspective that there is it's up there. I think it's up there. Another one I would compare it to would probably be something like a running back, where there was a point at which with cricket, with cricket, what are we talking with the NFL, where they stopped paying running backs a big amount of money. And what they started doing, going, there's no point paying this guy an 8-year career to be a running back, when actually what we really want is a fresh person to be able to be a running back. And as they get older, they contain their worth. Now, why is that? Because they're running through a field of people hitting them over and over again, right? I think fast bowling at that point is the same. The one difference between that and running backs, perhaps, and I'm not a huge NFL person, is, the flexibility, of course, of once you have played international cricket for 8 to 10 years as a fast bowler, or even 6 years as a fast bowler, chances are you will have learned other skills. Mackay Antini came in, without a lot of skills, and by the end of his career was a very skillful bowler. Pat Cummins could bowl the outswinger, and now he can bowl pretty much any delivery he wants, right? There are, Jimmy Anderson was a out and out fast bowler when he was picked for England, and now is one of the more skillful bowlers they've ever had. So perhaps it's a little bit different in that perspective, but actually just run and running as fast as you can for a long period of time. I do think, and I've said this a lot before, that a lot of the really fastest bowlers are usually picked probably too late. Right, you always have to pick them at the moment you think that they can find a decent line of length. And I think Jarrod Kimber was a marvel. He did have a penalty for steroid abuse at one stage, or whatever it was, whichever drug he was found guilty of use. So, I don't know if that had anything to do with the longevity of his career. But by the end of his career, I watched him play for Surrey. He got the groundsman. He got the groundsman to come on midway through when he was fielding and him. He's broken. He just looked broken as this incredible athlete just looked completely broken, and in a way that you do see with the running backs and boxers, I suppose, where there's almost nothing left on their body working by the end. So it's tough. I don't know where it would be up there. You need, I don't even know how you would work that out, but the stress that they put through their body for each delivery must amount to some of the worst of all time. I probably told the story before, but Alex Tudor always says when he's talking to young bowlers, you're going to hurt probably for the rest of your career. And then after that, for the rest of your life, every day, it's going to hurt when you do this. I remember when someone asked me recently if we would have injury substitutions. And I said, no, because they're too easy to manipulate. And I said, the easiest way to manipulate it is no fast bowlers ever fit. They'll always hurt. Right? There's always a hot spot. There's always something not working. There's always pain. There's always, there's a great video that Ian O'Brien put up years ago where he put a drill into his toenail and splurted out the blood. That's fast bowling. And Mol says, doesn't the fact that franchises unilaterally cancel contracts dissuade trades? In the NBA, you might trade off a player you don't want to pay. In the IPL, you just cut them. Yes, that's fine. I actually don't mind that. If you think that you've made a mistake and you want to get rid of the player, but shouldn't you be trying to get something back for that? Because if you just cut that player, yes, you get the money back, right? Great. What you don't get back is anything for the fact that that player took up a huge amount of your cap space and took up a huge amount of your roster, and you just lost that player without getting any players back for them, right? Without getting anything back other than the money not paying. And you hear this a lot, that I've even had team owners say things like this before, and I was like, yes, but you're still losing out. All you're saying is, we cut that player free, we're not paying them anymore, right? You haven't said, we got this player in auction, we paid them an absolute fortune. Someone else is probably going to want them, but we're going to get them off their books. It's much better not to do that, right? So I do think there's always a better way of doing that as well. Let's just go to the last. Oh, actually, I'll play one more ad. Oh, he says, as he completely forgets all the ads. I'll play one more ad, and then I'll just clear up anything that is in the chat. Oh, this is very optimistic at the moment. Let me tell you a story. When I was a kid, people would ask my dad if he wanted me to be Viv Richards, and he always said no. He wanted me to be Boycott, because apparently he liked boring things. But anyway, it turned out I could be neither. But thanks to Bodyline t-shirts, I can wear clothes showing both players. The Boycott Stick of Rhubarb is one of my favorite t-shirts. I really like the design. And it's not the only one I love. There's also a WG Grace one where he's in a pedalo, which is a part of my everyday wardrobe now. But there are heaps of other cool shirts on this site, and you can search for them by nations or type, and they seem to add to them all the time. I'm a big fan of the Court Marsh Bold Lily in the Australian collection, and there's also a lovely Morning Everyone in honour of Richie Benno's great greeting. The English area has the Fast Leg Theory shirt, which I think is a ripper. There's a couple of great West Indian ones I love, including this simple Viv Richards design, and a couple of Capel Dev t-shirts in the Indian section that I simply must have. I'm not saying that Bodyline t-shirts will have something that you will like, but I will say this: they got me to wear a Jeffrey Boycott inspired t-shirt. And that in itself is a minor miracle. All right, last three. Angus says, now that it looks like Bancroft will never play for Australia again, do you know of any other players who have not been selected due to personal grievances beyond the obvious, like Katic? I mean, there's hundreds. It's, there's a great story with Matthew Elliott upsetting all the players, never playing for Australia again, or at least not for about 4 years. Dean Jones would be another one from Australia. So there's two from Australia that the player, upset people around camp for various different reasons. I'm trying. There's some obviously, Vinod Kambli is probably a very, very good one. Srisanth would claim to be one of those. I think towards that sort of middle end of his career before that fixing. Kevin Peterson, a fairly famous example. Happens all the time. With cricket not being as professional as it should be, these things do occur. We see a lot of situations where players and selectors are very, very biased. They pick players that they want and go down that route. I think it's happened far too often, but I think it happens in other sports too. Players are traded away because coach and the other star player don't want to play anymore. These things happen. DM95 says, if Shane Bond ever remained fit enough to play, it's how good do you think he would have been? Look, I think the thing with Shane Bond is he probably would have been that generation's version of Cummins, although that generation did have Alan Donald. But yeah, he's probably slightly younger than Alan Donald. So yeah, he's probably that generation's version of Cummins, right? Not quite complete as Cummins, as but he was probably more skillful than Donald as well. Made that the wrong way of putting it. He's probably more skillful as a young bowler than Donald was. So we would assume that he would have aged in a similar way. If you look at Donald, Bond, and Cummins, I kind of see them as the guys who who mix together skill and pace. And I think Bond would have been one of those. I think he would maintain the ability to bowl very, very fast. And with all the skills he would have picked up along the way, I think he would have been unplayable. He's a fantastic bowler. In fact, he's gone on to be a coach and a very well-respected coach. I think tells you how smart he was as well. This wasn't just someone who ran in and bowled fast. Alan Donald was also a coach. Is a coach? Was a coach. Assistant coach? Oh God, I can't read this. Rohit says, why do bowlers change balls that go out of shape when they're relatively hard and new? When I bowl with an out-of-shape ball, they bounce unpredictably and hard to bat against. If you ever see a club cricket ball that's been that's gone around for 80 overs, and you have the chance of ever seeing a test ball that goes around for 80 overs, you'll understand we are not playing the same sport as they are. When they getting rid of those balls that aren't in the right shape because they're going soft. Once a ball goes soft at that pace, top batters just get completely on top of it. What you're talking about is that sort of when a ball sort of warps a little bit in club cricket, it usually remains fairly hard when doing so, and so the ball's still doing something. If you get unpredictable bounce with a soft ball, most top order batters in Test cricket can still handle it, so you don't have the same impact that you should have. It's a really good question though, but that is the reason, and that's why they want it. They want that ball to be as hard for as long as possible, because eventually it will get hit into marsh. If you look at Test balls compared to club balls. It's just not the same. Anyway, last one podcast. Thank you to everyone. Sorry if we had to cut out again. I'm doing the best I can. Not ideal, but this is what we have. But thanks to everyone for the support. Thanks for the questions. Great questions again. And I will be back again next week for Uncovered. And who knows, Bharat Sundaresan actually exists in real life. But bye for now, and thank you for the support. If you like what we are making here and you want to know if you can help out, well, you can. On top of asking super chats on our lives, you can also support us through Patreon or buy me a coffee. The more support we can get, the better and more videos we can make. On Patreon, there are plenty of other things we offer too, like a Discord server, the chance to ask questions directly, AMAs, and early versions of our recordings. This channel only exists because people like you help support it. We have to buy equipment, software, pay wages, and my mortgage, I suppose, just to make this stuff happen. And if you don't have any money available to spend, it isn't just your money we want. Shares, likes, retweets, comments, subscriptions, the little bell icon thing, all of it. They help us build and become more professional, make more videos, better videos, all that sort of stuff. So thank you for watching everything we make and for all your support so far.